Well, it's a great pleasure to be talking today to Bob McKersie, former dean of the ILR School. We were hoping to have Bob here with us in person this fall as we were kicking off the 75th celebration of the founding of the ILR School. But obviously, with the pandemic and the need for the public health measures, we're not able to do the large in-person event we were hoping for. So it's great to have Bob here via Zoom so that we can at least talk online with him. So great to see you here, Bob. Thanks for joining us.
Well, I was there for the 50th anniversary of the school back in the 70s.
And I was thinking as I was getting ready to talk to you today, we've having a conversation with you as a former dean, but you're obviously somebody very connected with our field. I was realizing that when I was teaching my PhD seminar most recently, I had assigned the students 3 different works of yours and maybe kind of bookmarking different points of your career, starting out with the behavioral theory of labor negotiation, back from the 1960s, your great book with Dick Walton. Then I was also signing part of the transformation of American industrial relations with Tom Kochen and our own Harry Katz. And then from the 1980s, and then the 1990s book on strategic negotiations with Walton, but then also Joel Kutcher-Gershenfeld. And it's sort of a nice set of generations of scholars across those works as well that you've collaborated with. And I've noticed that over your career, you've worked with people from different generations of the field of industrial relations.
Fortunate to have good colleagues.
Yeah.
Well,
And something I also was noticing when we were getting ready for this, I was noticing the number of colleagues here at the ILR School who are still here who mentioned that you were the dean who hired them, who were colleagues like Ron Ehrenberg, Tova Hammer, who are some of our senior colleagues now, but they came in as new faculty when you were the dean. What was that process like of hiring faculty when you became dean back in the 1970s? It's quite a transformation from the usual academic role when you're the one who is going to the dean, and now you're in the position to bring new people on board.
yeah, well, when I was candidating, I had an interesting conversation with a provost, a fellow by the name of Bob Plain, who said, if you come to this position, you'll be coming at a time when the founding faculty will all be retiring. So we're ending kind of the first generation of faculty, and you're going to, in a sense, have the opportunity to replenish the ranks of the faculty. And we were actually able to hire, 8, 9, 10 people over a couple of year period. And that was exciting time to say, look, we're going into kind of chapter 2 of the history of this school, and let's bring some really good talent here, and I think we did.
And that was the days of mandatory retirement, right? So that faculty had to retire at a particular age, so that you had a real wave of retirements happening all about the same point in time.
Well, not really. In some ways, it would have been easier for me as dean if there had been the mandatory. That law had been rescinded some years prior. So it was actually a plan that we worked out with the senior faculty. Some of them perhaps were not so enthusiastic, but if you take retirement and we employ you half time and we'll make up the other half from college funds and also your retirement, your income will be the same. But of course, just the word retirement can be a threat to a lot of us. So there were some challenges in executing that program.
Uh, yeah, it was clearly one that was tremendously successful when I look at the number of colleagues and how long they stayed at the ILR school. I mean, you after being dean moved on to MIT, but many of the people that you'd hired stayed for 30, 40 years, and a number of them are still on the faculty. So that's a tremendous longevity in terms of academic commitment to the place. So one thing I'm curious about your experience, you became dean. When I look at your sort of academic career and kind of a middle of your career. Some people become deans, as kind of the end point of their careers. But you made your mark as a scholar in Chicago in the '60s. Then you became dean, and then you continued on as a scholar after that at MIT. How did that experience of being the dean during that kind of midpoint in your career, how did that affect you, change kind of your career trajectory?
Well, it made a big difference for me because I should talk about what really hit me about the ILR school that was so different from my experience as graduate student and my early days as a faculty member at the University of Chicago. It was the extension role of the school and the land grant mission of Cornell that I had some inkling about this going to the school, but that really became, in a sense, the new thing for me to travel around the state. At that point, Extension had offices in Buffalo, Rochester, Albany, New York City, Long Island. And not only getting out to the programs that the school was offering for practitioners, but there was also at that particular time a challenge coming from the labor movement who had been through earlier non-credit courses, used to be called labor liberal arts at the school. These individuals very good at knowing how to pressure for their objectives, being labor leaders, wanted credit for those courses, wanted degrees. So that led to a whole series of developments, primarily in New York City, with the Labor College and eventually even with a graduate program that we partnered with Baruch College of City University. So I think that aspect, I mean, I was ready for the academic or the scholarship side of the school because that's what I had been doing at Chicago, and the teaching. And I always taught every year. I had at least one course. So that part of it was natural. But the extension in meeting, in a sense, the labor movement and also the management contingency was really a very important kind of whole new pasture for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really telling point that I've noticed in my own experience taking over the deanship. That I'd been aware of this distinctive aspect that where the land grant university for New York State, and that's really unique amongst the Ivy League schools. But the impact that the school has through the extension work that we do, our outreach, that means for the deans, and I'm sure you have the same experience going to Albany. I think more than I ever expected to be Albany, New York in my life. But you see the impact there that the school has on the state. How state leaders turn to the school on important issues. And I know you did a number of things as dean that kind of drew you into state activities and working with state government. Can you maybe talk a little about your experiences there?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, there was always, as you say, the trip to Albany, and that would be a long discussion in its own right as how to mobilize friends of the school to make sure your budget was as good as it could be. And we had some budget cuts, 2 rounds of budget cuts, and the labor movement moved right in. But in terms of my own kind of personal involvement, kind of more professionally, there were a couple of projects in the state that I got involved in and I thought were just, really memorable. The big one was the Continuity of Employment Committee. At that point in the '70s, there was the big theme of deinstitutionalization people who had been in hospitals, various mental conditions, were being moved back into halfway houses and back into the community. So there was a large number of layoffs happening of state workers. And without getting into a lot of details, there was a joint labor management committee. A couple of our PhD students got their theses out of the project. We were in business for 5-6 years, had a lot of practical on the ground programs to help the people who were displaced. And I just count that as kind of one of the most significant things I think I did in my career, chairing that joint committee called the Continuity of Employment Committee. There were some other things. There was a project down in Long Island called the Multi-Municipal Productivity Improvement in Nassau County with funds from the U.S. Department of Labor. And Carol Wittenberg, who's I'm sure retired by now, retired probably from school even earlier, headed it up. But I spent a lot of time there with both labor and management. So it was fun to, in a sense, get out and also, try to be of help to some of the challenges in the state.
Now, you retell some of these stories in a book I want to mention called A Field in Flux, which you recently published, which is a memoir of your career, but also really a account of kind of the history of the field of industrial labor relations and how it's evolved over time, that retells some of the more challenging things that you had to deal with. One of them that really struck me is that you had to deal with some challenging issues around academic freedom. It's something that we talk about in universities as being really important. That faculty have academic freedom to publish the results of their research. Whoever it may affect. But you had to deal with a challenging issue in that area when you were dean, that there were complaints about one of our faculty members' research, Ron Ehrenberg. Could you tell us a little about that experience?
Yeah, Ron was asked by the Public Service Commission, which is, I don't know if it's still labeled that way, but it was the commission that set rates for utilities, in this case, the telephone company. Their rates for service used to be called Bell Telephone way back then. And they approached Ron and said, Ron, we want to do a study on the wages for telephone workers. Are they where they should be, or is there some impact from collective bargaining? And Ron came to me and said, Bob, I'm going to be doing some pretty sensitive work on the wages for telephone workers. Is it okay? I said, fine, it's an interesting study. So Ron conducted the study and issued his report. And I thought the labor movement would be kind of happy because he showed that, hey, there was a difference. Where there were unions for telephone workers, the workers were earning maybe 15, 20% more than they would have if they didn't have a union. But the union wasn't very happy because what the commission was then going to do was going to say to the telephone company, well, if you want to pay the workers more than competitive rates, you better be taking this out of your profits. And Morty Barr, president of the union, knew exactly what that would do. There would be a pushback. The company wasn't about to lower its profits. They were going to, in a sense, start taking a strong stand the next round and saying, hey, workers, we've got the Ehrenberg study and you're overpaid. We're not any increase at all. So as soon as that report came out, Morty Barr, who was on our advisory committee, came to a meeting and called me aside and he said, Bob, this is disastrous for us. This is just terrible. We got to get this whole thing repudiated. I said, I'm not going to repudiate the report. It's good scholarship. It's got to go through. Well, Morty then put the word out to the whole AFL-CIO Council of New York State that there was research that was undermining the bargaining power of unions in the state. And we got, in a sense, tarred in, I don't know what the exact title would be, but if somebody crosses a picket line, they're a scab.
Yeah.
We were seen as an institution that was not on the side of labor. In fact, we were undermining labor. So in quick order, a number of summer programs that the labor unions were going to have on campus got canceled. We got letters from everybody, including the president of the AFL-CIO, Mr. Ray Corbett. It took a long time for this to blow over, because once the word goes out about an institution, I mean, we had unions not using our services for a couple of years after that, because once the word goes out that the school should be blacked or whatever the word is, it takes a while to recover. But
Yeah.
we recovered.
Yeah, it was really striking when I was reading in your book about that story. It was one of the ones that really resonated with me, and thinking about my role as dean is following that same principle of allowing faculty to publish their research, come what may, in terms of who does or doesn't like the results, because we have that commitment to academic freedom, and to the pursuit of the research, wherever it may lead. So it's one of the things I found most helpful for myself in thinking about the role that a dean's got to do in supporting the academic freedom of the institution. Another thing that I think was interesting in your book is you're thinking about this question of how the field has evolved and where it's going. This is 75 years into the history of the ILR school. I was wondering what you think about how the mission of ILR will help shape the next 75 years. As we think about the issues of work, labor, and employment going forward, it seems like we're in a real period of strain and change. We see the changes, certainly in technology in the workplace. I think the remote work that we're doing right now is sort of, an indicator of that kind of acceleration. But we're seeing other major changes right now, changing demographics of the workforce, concerns about the future of jobs, globalization continues to have huge impacts. When you think about kind of the future direction, as a former dean, where do you think the mission should be taking us as we're going forward?
Well, that's a great question, Alex. And let me just step back, because I think the exciting thing about our field is it gets its energy from what's happening in the world of work, broadly defined. And certainly when the school was founded in the late 40s, there were so many challenges of transitioning to a peacetime economy. And then as you kind of fast forward, there were a lot of other, kind of big topics. Another big topic that, of course, was unfolding in the 60s and 70s was public sector collective bargaining, and New York State was leading the way. And the ILR faculty really responded. I mean, the work that was done by ILR faculty on public sector collective bargaining, both research and then also service. I mean, many of them went out as fact finders and arbitrators. And then we had a period where it's worker alienation and quality of work life challenges. And now today, and you've alluded to some of them, Alex, I mean, we have vast inequality in income. We have the challenges of new technology. We've got what's coming out of Black Lives Matter. We've got climate issues. I mean, there's so many big challenges facing the world, and they can be, in a sense, factored down to the workplace. And I think the challenge always for any school is to have the faculty kind of thirsting to get out and understand how those problems are being played out and where solutions are starting to emerge. Where there's best practice that can be, in a sense, taken up to scale. And I think the challenge, and this is always a challenge, because Ithaca is a wonderful place for the school to be based, and having the colleagues from the rest of Cornell University is outstanding. But sometimes the problems aren't right there, within commuting distance. Faculty have to maybe do a little travel, but of course we're learning also how to do research over Zoom. So maybe travel isn't quite as critical to get to the source of the problems. But I wish I were a young person now. I think the opportunities in our field for a young researcher to get out and work on these issues, understand what's happening, codifying examples of best practice. I think it's just a great opportunity for the school, and especially for the faculty, and also for the extension staff, because in some ways, extension staff, being based in some of the cities, may be closer to some of the problems, not all the problems, than the faculty in Ithaca.
Yeah, I think that's such a great message, because we are an Ivy League institution, but I think one of the great strengths of ILR School is that we're not stuck in the ivory tower, right? The proverbial ivory tower. Yes, we're in Ithaca, 10 square miles surrounded by reality, I think is the bumper sticker. But we have our colleagues up in Buffalo and in New York City, working directly with organizations, and our faculty, even though they are great social scientists, sociologists, economists, psychologists, historians. They come together, I think, because the school is about real problems, right? The real problems of the day, and taking that kind of academic knowledge and trying to figure out how it can be used to help address problems, right, that our society faces, and hopefully that'll continue on. One of the things we have been doing is hiring a bunch of new faculty. I think I've benefited from a generational effect, that you hired a bunch of great faculty in the 70s. Well, just by sort of natural processes of time, we've now been seeing the retirement of a number of those faculty, and so it's been time to hire again. So there's a bunch of exciting new faculty now at the ILR School who give me a lot of hope for the future. Well,
it's great that they have your leadership there, Alex, to, in a sense, move on to what I guess I'd call sort of chapter 3, or however you want to. Yeah.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the school, I think the school has a bright future, because certainly the issues of the workplace are still as vital as ever, and we certainly see our students, really engaged, interested. So that's hopeful. When I sort of think about some of these big issues like climate change or racial injustice in our society, they can be dispiriting, but certainly when I see our students and how engaged they are, that's one of the hopeful things. One of the good things about being an academic, I think, is you get to see that hopefulness of the younger students. Well, I want to thank you, Bob, for taking the time to spend some time with us and hear your recollections and your thoughts. You left an enormous legacy at the ILR School. You really shaped its kind of direction for many decades, and so it's been a real pleasure having a chance to chat. And you'll always be welcome back here at the East Hill. Hopefully, when we're all able to travel again, we'll have you back in person.
Well, let me just say it's been such an important part of our lives, and I say our because Nancy really enjoyed the years there, and 3 of our children have gone through Cornell, and one is an ILR graduate, and as I speak, she's actually in another place of this house. She's been a teacher at Bank Street School and ended up being president of the union at one point. So there, in a sense, is the connection of the school to our younger generation and our own family.
Yeah, putting our ILR education to good work. Great to hear.
Great. Anyway, I'm happy to play any role I can. I mean, the 75th anniversary is so important, because the school celebrated its 25th anniversary. I wasn't there for that, but I was there for the 50th, and now you're leading the 75th. That's great.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Bye.